basically, what controls hormones? Because the thing is that hormones, we know that they help to tell cells and tissues what to do at a distance, but what actually controls hormones itself? Do hormones just appear out of nowhere? Are they just secreted at random? And the thing is that there are various mechanisms of hypothalamic control. So the thing is that hormones are, well, so this is just one example. One major control center of hormones is your brain and the substructures of your brain called the hypothalamus and the pituitary. Now, these aren't the only structures that control hormones. Remember that some organs can produce hormones by themselves. But the thing is that this is a major control center for many of the hormones. All right, so if you look at this, there's a lot going on here. This is the Martini version. It's also on the slides that were uploaded. But this part right here, this third part, all the way on the right, well, what do you see? Sympathetic output, preganglionic, adrenal cortex, adrenal medulla, epinephrine, and norepinephrine. We did cover this in PHYL 141, and if you need a refresher or are new to PHYL 142, maybe you should look at the nervous system playlist. We do cover that in previous lectures. Now, something that's new to PHYL 142, so I did kind of refer to it, but now I'm going to talk about this more in detail. So I did mention, like, sometimes during this semester and also frequently during last semester, that there's something called the fight or flight response, your sympathetic response. But in more broader concept is what we call the general adaptation syndrome. So there are 3 phases to this. Now, will you necessarily go through this phase? Or actually, let's rewind a bit. What causes this syndrome? The big trigger for this syndrome is stress. So stress starts off the general adaptation syndrome. And the first phase of this general adaptation syndrome is the alarm reaction. So this is the initial response to stress. So when you have a stressful situation, what do you kind of feel? That kind of like jitteriness, that butterflies in your stomach, that feeling you might want to vomit, that kind of trembling and anxiety. So that's all that part of the alarm reaction. And what are the parts of the alarm reaction? Well, things like, yeah, your fight or flight system, your sympathetic nervous system is kicking in as releasing all these stress hormones. So these stress hormones are causing that you to get kind of amped up, but it also kind of releases all these nutrients in your system to give you a burst of energy to handle that stress and whatever that immediate response is. Now, what happens if that's okay? Say it's like something that's temporary and you get out of that situation, you're going to calm down. But what if that stress is a little more prolonged? Well, if there's more time and that stress lasts for a longer time, you go past the alarm reaction phase and then go to another phase of this general adaptation syndrome. And that is what we call the resistance phase. Now, the resistance phase, thing is that when you have sympathetic activity, you're releasing all these calories into your bloodstream, but you're also burning up all these calories and nutrients and your reserves as well. So your body is trying to kind of maintain, the thing is, like, remember that homeostasis term? So your body's always trying to maintain some sort of balance, but now it's like, okay, the stress is kind of lasting longer than I thought it would. Now let's try to kind of put up some, like, try to compensate for it and restore some balance. So during the resistance phase, this tries to kind of basically balance out everything that happened during that first phase. So what is it going to do? It's going to kick in that parasympathetic activity. Maybe you want to start to digest more nutrients so you're able to replenish and resupply all the nutrients you burned up during that alarm reaction phase. So say, okay, the stress is gone, you might be done with resistance, and now the parasympathetic can take over and rebuild your body. But what if this stress prolongs even further? So then you enter the third phase, which is called the exhaustion phase. And I'm pretty sure this is kind of like what we're all feeling with the pandemic. First we're like, oh no, alarm, resistance, and now we're all kind of over it. And this is why you saw me helping out that vaccination clinic. I saw some of you, those of you who said hi. But anyway, so the exhaustion phase. So that's when the stress continues past resistance. Doesn't mean, like, when you have the general adaptation syndrome, it doesn't mean you'll necessarily go through all 3 phases. It depends on how long this stress lasts. And this is when the stress has gone past that resistance phase and it's really, really long and going on. So it's prolonged activity. So all these hormones here, they're still being released, but now they're starting to wear down on the body. So they're actually starting to kind of have these negative effects and harmful effects because you have these hormones like cortisol, epinephrine, and norepinephrine. They're still circulating, but your body doesn't really have time to repair or repair itself from that alarm reaction. So it's kind of like running, yeah, it's just running yourself ragged for like layman's terms. All right, so again, doesn't necessarily mean you'll have to go through all three phases. It just depends on how long that stress lasts. All right, so then let's talk about this. So sympathetic activity. Remember, the sympathetic nervous system is part of what we call the autonomic nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system handles all these things that control your internal organs. These are all these involuntary responses. So there's a special brain structure called the amygdala. It's very responsive for emotional control, especially our responses to fear. But the amygdala is also, with the hypothalamus, part of what we call the limbic system, also involved in like a lot of our emotional responses as well. So the amygdala is directly wired to the hypothalamus. That's what I'm getting at here. And then the hypothalamus, this is the one that initiates all the sympathetic activity, this fight or flight system. So we have these sympathetic nerve fibers that run a lot down the spinal cord, and then this carries, or these the sympathetic nerve fibers that run along the spinal cord ends up at these preganglionic nerve fibers. Now, depending on which is the target organ or tissue, it might go to postganglionic or or in this case, it's going straight to the adrenal glands. This is why the adrenal glands are very special. Again, if you were here last semester, usually there's a preganglionic and postganglionic nerve fiber, but the adrenal glands, they're special. There's no postganglionic nerve fiber. The postganglionic nerve fiber is actually specialized cells within the adrenal gland. And then the adrenal glands, they release epinephrine and norepinephrine. So remember, if you like that mnemonic, that SAN-bean mnemonic, remember those neurotransmitters? Yeah, they were epinephrine and norepinephrine. But instead of being released by a postganglionic nerve fiber onto a target tissue or organ, now they are being released into the bloodstream. So now they're going to become hormones.